Hey, welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I really hope you enjoy this video. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to, this is now week 8 of our complete guide to the RPA. So we're really digging into it. We're looking at the amendments, addendas, any of the other ancillary forms that go with it as we go through. We're talking about strong ways to write it, how to counter it, making sure that you're including the right documents. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in, share my screen so we can get started. And you should be looking at right now paragraph 3Q of the RPA. So 2 weeks ago, right? Last week, 2 weeks ago, a week ago, we were looking at the first two reports, 3Q1 and 3Q2, right? That's what we talked about. We talked about the NHD report, the importance of making sure that your seller was the one who was responsible for that NHD report. We also talked about the optional wildfire disclosure report. So if you missed any of that, you could go back to that video. It's up on my YouTube channel, so you could take a look at that one. Again, remember, this is optional, but if we're not countering it out, we're going to be required to provide it. So be careful as the listing agent that you're keeping your eyes open for that report and not getting yourself into a position where you may be required to provide it. Okay. All right, let's move on. So the next one, this one, 3Q3, where it just says blank report, and then it has buyer, seller, or both. If we're looking at that blank report, now I know that I try to stress to you guys as strongly as I possibly can, do not request the termite report in your offers, because once we make that request of the termite report, then generally the lender makes that a requirement for the termite clearance before you can fund the loan, right? So we want to try to avoid asking for that unless it's absolutely necessary. And the only time it's absolutely necessary is when this is a VA buyer. So for this example, we're going to pretend it is a VA buyer. So what we're going to ask for here is the wood destroying pest inspection. So now I'm adding for, I spelled destroying wrong, wood destroying pest inspection report. That's just the report. So if I am going to ask for that report to be provided from the seller, because like I said, in VA, you know, we have to get it done. It's not uncommon. We can ask the seller to pay for it. The seller isn't required to, but we could ask. In this case, we're asking them for the report. This is not the report and the repairs, because remember, this says strictly right here, report. So if you're asking for anything other than the report here, that's not the proper place. Does that make sense? So when we're asking for the report and then we have to ask for repairs, hold on a second. My music is starting up on me here. When we're going to ask for the repairs are in a different section. We're going to ask for them to do the clearance, the repairs down here or here, depending on if these spaces are available. So if we're asking for the report, it goes there. There's nothing wrong with that. We're asking for the seller to pay for it. If we want the seller to do the repairs, we could go down here and write in the wood destroying pest. I keep spelling destroying wrong. Have something against G's, pest clearance. And then we're going to check off the seller box here. So that's where the request for the work would go. And if I have something else that goes in this place that I'm asking for, then it would go down here. I would put here that the seller to buy clearance section 1 and 2 for the wood destroying pest inspection. So either one of those will work, right? If you're going to ask for it. But if you're not doing a VA loan, There's no real reason to ask for this. What this is going to cause more than anything is issues, because you're going to have to deal with the chance the lender may make it a requirement. The only other time the lender will make it a requirement is if the wood destroying pest damage is so visible that the appraiser calls it out and says, hey, this needs to be done. That's the only other time. So in most cases, I would leave it out. And CAR feels like it shouldn't be there because, they took it out of it used to be in the purchase agreement, and there used to even be an addendum for wood destroying pest inspections on the negotiation part, like who was paying for what and what they were going to do. But even CAR years ago decided, why are termite inspections and repairs any different than the inspection that you would do when you have a professional home inspection and the repairs that you would request in that case? So they put them together, and now in your request for repairs, there's the request for the section 1 and 2 work to get done. So that's why it was taken out of the purchase agreement, because the legal team at CAR felt like termite inspections and reports were more the responsibility of the buyer doing their due diligence than it was a requirement, or should be a requirement, of the seller to provide. Okay. So in this case, if there's any report that you want the seller to provide, you could put it in here. Or if you want to make sure that the buyer is committed to getting this report, you could put the report that the buyer wants to pay for also. But there is no need. Think about once those reports are in there, like the termite, like any other kind of like if you're going to do some kind of a soil stability test or something like that, just keep in mind that once those things happen, if there is anything on there, the lender could require a copy of those reports. And if there's something that needs to be fixed, the lender could require those things to happen. Let's see. I understand if you put the report, the bank is going to require the repairs. Wouldn't it just be better to leave it alone? Yeah, that's what I just said. We got to leave it out. Don't put it in. The only time you put it in is if you have a VA loan. That's it. Only time. Okay. So keep that in mind. But again, any reports that you want to request for the seller to pay for, you could put them here and check the seller box. That does not include 3Q3 does not include any pre-sale inspections, because that's handled in paragraphs Q5 and 6, 3Q5 and 6, and we'll talk about those in a moment. Okay. This section right here, Q4, where it says smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, and water heater bracing, who's going to pay for that? Now, earlier when we went through the RPA, it says that the seller is going to make sure that these items, the smoke alarms, the carbon monoxide detectors, and the water heater strapping, is done in the first 7 days of the transaction, because it needs to be done prior to the appraiser going out, so that the appraisal doesn't make it a condition of the property appraising. Then they have to do re-inspections. So that's why that exists. What this is not about who's going to do that work. It's who's going to pay for it. So you could, for example, say, Mr. Seller, you need to install this stuff, but when we close, part of my closing costs and what I'm going to pay for will be that bill that is submitted to escrow for the cost of installing the smoke alarms, the carbon monoxide detectors, and the water heater. So I could check this box, buyer. The seller's still responsible for the installation. The buyer is just responsible for the charges. That's how this works. Now, I know what would happen is if we were to do that and check this box off as buyer, then everybody would assume, well, the buyer is going to install it. Right? That's what everybody's talking about. This is just who pays. Allocation of costs, paragraph 3Q. So it's just the cost. It's not the actual work. So you have to be aware of that, right? When you're checking off these things. So in most cases, it's common. We're going to ask that the seller pay for that. And because they're already doing that work in the first 7 days. Okay. That's pretty straightforward. The next are where we go into those city pre-sale inspections and reports, right? So Q5 is the actual inspection or report. So that would fall under City of Compton, Maywood, Huntington Park, Linwood, Southgate, any of those cities that do an actual inspection. The reports, excuse me, would be like LA, the 9A report, the property report that is not an inspection, but it is a required report, and that report just lists all the permits that have been applied for and granted, any substandards that exist on the property, and whether or not the sewer line is permitted. And for me, that is the most important bit of information, is that we know that that sewer line is permitted. We've had a number of cases where people sold properties without getting the 9A, and when there was a resale of that property, they found out that they had unpermitted sewer lines. And so it cost them money to get things fixed. So it's super important for you guys as the buyer's agent to make sure that you're requesting from the seller to send the 9A. And there is nothing that allows you to waive any of those reports. As far as waiving, I think the city of Gardena is the only one that'll allow you to waive the inspection report, but you got to go fill out a paperwork and pay them something in order to do that. Okay. So that's the report, Q5. So if I check off on here, seller, okay, on Q5, that's me requesting that the seller is going to provide that inspection and subsequent report. Okay. If I fail to check anything here, now who is going to do the repairs? This is government required point of sale corrective and remedial actions. So let's take Southgate, for example. From Southgate, I get the inspection. After the inspection is done, they send me a report. In that report are going to be the corrective and remedial actions that need to be taken based on that report. So if I'm checking seller on this, I'm checking seller on that, right? That's the norm. But if I already know, if I'm a buyer's agent and I've had the conversation with the listing agent already, and they tell me, hey, listen, we're going to give you the pre-sale inspection report, but we want the buyers to be responsible, then I can do it from the beginning and put it in my purchase agreement from the beginning instead of forcing the listing agent to counter me for that. Bertha had her hand up, so let me ask Bertha. Go ahead, Bertha, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. It's not that the report, the 9A report, it's only for City of LA?
Yes.
That was my, oh, okay.
Yeah. That's only City of LA.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So, sorry, I wasn't clear on that. So if you know ahead of time, right, that's going to happen, you can write your offer that way. Now, maybe in the city of Southgate, that could be something in any of those cities with pre-sale inspections, you offering without having to be countered or told, hey, look, all I want from you is the report, because in many cases, the only person that can provide the report is the listing agent or the seller. The buyer's agent can't go in and get it. The buyer can't order it. So the seller has to. But what I'm going to say in my offer to try to increase the strength of my offer, and I've already had this conversation with my buyers, is we're willing to take on the responsibility as long as you give us the report and we know what we're taking on the responsibility to do. Okay. So that's what this section is. Q5 and 6 is solely about the reports and who's going to do the repairs, the corrective actions that are required on those reports. If I'm a listing agent, this is one of the things that really, like, it's the same as, we're more than a year into our changes of how we do business when it comes to compensation and having to fill out more paperwork and all that stuff. We're far deeper into that with all of these pre-sale inspection reports in the various cities that do them. Like we're years and years and years into that. And still, agents try to circumvent the requirement of these inspections. I get it when you're doing repairs on a property that are unpermitted, and in cities like Southgate, even if the house was originally built that way, they're probably going to say, well, it's not to code now, so you have to fix it. Even though that you didn't do anything wrong, the city is still going to find something wrong with it. And so I get that, why they don't want to. But the benefit to most of these cities is that they allow the buyer to take on the responsibility of doing the work. And so if we're priced right and we negotiate properly, we should do our end of ordering and ordering the inspection, having the report in a timely manner, providing it to all the buyers that we want, and then countering every buyer, hey, you're going to be responsible for doing this work. We're not doing it. That's fair. That's something that you're able to do. Now, will it reduce the number of buyers that you may have on the property? Maybe, but at least when you get into escrow, you're in escrow with somebody that's willing to do that work. And the earlier we have the report, so that we're not ordering the report when we get our offer accepted, have the report so that when I send counter offers, I can say, here's the report. And those people that I say, okay, yeah, I'm willing to accept, they're accepting knowing what they have to do. You have a better chance of that escrow closing. But what happens is that we don't order the report until we get an offer accepted. And in most of these cities, it takes a considerable amount of time to get somebody out there to do the inspection, to get the actual report back, to be able to do all the stuff that you need to do to negotiate with the buyer about what they're going to be responsible for, right? So the earlier we do it, the better chances we have of having an efficient transaction, because we're going to get buyers that are fully informed of what they're responsible for. And the flip side to it is, if I take a listing today, right? So I take a listing, and I think in Southgate, it takes 2 weeks to get the inspection done. I think you can pay to get it done in a week or something, but let's say it takes 2 weeks. So I take a listing and I say, Bertha, what we're going to do is I'm going to keep your property off the market until we get the city pre-sale inspection report back. We're going to order it right away. We're going to get it. As soon as we have that, during that time while they're doing that, we can take our pictures, get the marketing all pulled together, get everything ready to go. Then once we have the report and we know what's going to be required as far as corrections for the city, then we can market the property. And two things we could do. We can adjust the price prior to marketing to make it more valuable or more attractive to buyers, even though they have to do the work. Or we could take, if it's not a lot, we could take the initiative to do the work and have it done. And then we're marketing saying, by the way, we're just waiting for the clearance. We've already done all the work. Here's the report. Now we have an even more marketable property. But if we have to do all that stuff ahead of time, if we're not prepped, and we just wait, like most of us choose to do, is like, well, I don't want, and this is what happens is sellers try to talk you out of the benefit of having it. And they say, well, I don't want to get the report because what if my house doesn't sell and then I have to do the repairs? Honestly, the chances in a city like Southgate or Huntington Park or any of the areas around us where the inventory is everywhere, like Southgate's a little high, it's at 3.4 months, but properties are still selling for higher than asking price, than higher than list price. So if that's the case, and there's very few expireds, I think there's maybe, I did the stats and I don't have them handy, but I did the stats for tomorrow, and there's maybe between canceled and expired listings, there's maybe 60 or 70 for the entire year. So if you've taken a listing, and I think that's even high, it probably is closer to 40 something. If you take a listing in those cities, it's going to sell. So we've got to just start to get into the fact that they're required. We can't avoid them. We can't waive them. We can't sell a house without getting them. And we have to start doing things the right way. So that's, again, soapbox for me. It's just I see so many times where people are like, oh, I didn't know that I had to do a pre-sale inspection, or we waived it. It's not allowed. Okay, so you got to keep that in mind. Questions about the pre-sale, the repairs, the responsibility. Now, one other thing in Southgate, if the seller bought the property and they had agreed, they signed that affidavit that they were going to take responsibility for the corrections, and didn't do it after they did that, after they took that liability on, that responsibility on, and now try to sell the property, they cannot now put it on the buyer. The seller has to do the work. So you got to keep that in mind too when you're talking to somebody in Southgate. I don't know if that's the case with other cities. I do know that for sure in Southgate. So if you're listing a property in Southgate, then you got to make sure that if they're going to request for the buyer to do the work, they would have had to have done any work that was required of them when they purchased the property. Okay, let's see. Go ahead. You had a question.
Yeah, so these requirements are only for Southgate, or is this pretty much anywhere in California?
No. That there's certain cities in California, and our TC Maria just put in the chat. If you're an agent here at All Stars, in All Stars Connect, there's a list of all the cities that have pre-sale inspections of some kind. But no, it's not every city, right? Downey doesn't have one. Norwalk doesn't have one. Whittier doesn't have one. You know, there's more cities that don't than do, but I wouldn't be shocked if eventually everybody does. All right. Thanks for your question. All right. Moving on. Anything else? Anything else? No. About the pre-sale? No. Escrow fees. So let's explain how this thing works, right? So here's the escrow fee. If I were to check, the escrow fee is the charges for the escrow company only. If I were to check buyer to pay for it, then the buyer would pay both the seller and the buyer's portion of escrow fees. Now, if I wanted to, if I couldn't qualify for more, but I had cash to spend on closing costs, I could say to a seller, hey, we're going to pay your escrow fees if you accept my offer, right? Helps them net some more. The buyer could do that. If we check this box, which is what you see most common, for an example, if I were to go back here to credits, right? So I go back here to the closing cost credit. And let's say that the buyer's asking for the closing costs to get paid for, and they're asking for $8,000, right? Sometimes buyer's agents think, well, since I'm getting the credit, then the seller is paying for the closing costs, the seller's paying for this. That's not how it works. If I do that, then the seller's going to pay my escrow fee, his escrow fee, and still credit me the $8,000. So it's going to cost the seller more. So as buyer's agent, as listing agent, we have to pay attention to what's here. Okay. So buyer pays all of it, seller pays all of it. That's not really what we want to do. Now, this both section right here, I just spoke with an agent this week and they said, what's the both for? The both could be, and just like on these two, all these where it says both, you could, instead of buyer or seller, you could say, we're both going to pay, but we're going to pay it 50-50, or seller 60, buyer 40, right? I can now dictate, hey, what that means now is if we're both paying it and we're doing it by percentages, whether that's 50-50 or 60-40 or whatever you want to do, now what it means is I'm going to take the total of the buyer side, the total of the seller side, I'm going to add them together and I'm going to split them by that percentage. And that's how we're going to pay our escrow fees. That's what that would be for, right? Because people used to put all the time on their 50-50, buyer, seller 50-50 on the old contract. The problem with that is, as we know, as listing agents, and when we have an escrow company that is the escrow company that we use on a regular basis, if I were to go to my escrow company and say, hey, listen, my seller's very short on funds, can we reduce their escrow fees? And my escrow, because I do business with them, says, yeah, sure. And they reduce their escrow fees for the seller. They don't have to reduce those escrow fees for the buyer if the contract states each their own fees. If we put something like both and put 50-50, then they have to take my discount, the full fees for the buyer, put them together, whatever that total is, cut them in half. Now I've just reduced the reduction in cost that my seller received, right? And I've given 50% of it to the buyer. So that's not beneficial. So the correct way to do it is always going to be each their own, unless you have some kind of agreement where the seller is going to pay a larger amount or the buyer is going to pay a larger amount. Each their own fees. So whatever discounts the seller or buyer may receive, the seller or buyer receives and nobody else infringes on. Okay. Escrow holder, when we're talking about writing the offer, of course, we're going to put seller's choice in here because we're trying to reduce the amount of counters or any kind of hindrance for us to get our offer accepted. So seller's choice is usually the norm that we would put in there. If we put seller's choice, if you're a listing agent, you receive an offer that says seller's choice, there's no need to counter it. It's one of the things that I've always been puzzled by is that agents are reluctant to write counter offers anyway. When somebody tells me, oh, I accepted the offer, no, it was perfect, on their, when they accept something as a listing agent. And I know inevitably if I look through the contract, I'm going to find some things that need to be cleaned up. And eventually they will, escrow finds them, things get changed and lenders see it, they do amendments and all that stuff. But why not? Let's just be clean from the beginning. Right. So one of the things that has always puzzled me is that agents are hesitant to counter anything. And when they do write a counter, they write very little. But then sometimes they have things like this where the offer was written with seller's choice on the escrow holder, and they write a counter that says escrow holder to be whatever escrow and the escrow officer's name in there. Not necessary. It's not necessary. I don't care. I already told you seller's choice. I don't really care what escrow officer you use. I'm just telling you, you pick whatever you want. That is not something that is required to be countered. If it says seller's choice, you just choose, and that's it. That's how it works. If there is something other than seller's choice, there is the buyer's escrow on there or buyer's choice is on there or whatever is in there, then you need to counter it. But in that case, there's a couple things you could do. You could take some shortcuts that just say seller reserves right to all services. I don't like that because I think sometimes listing agents use that as like this weird blanket thing and it doesn't really apply to everything. So be specific. Escrow holder to be specific escrow. You don't have to put your escrow officer's name in. The only reason, and we'll talk about this right now with title and home warranty, the only reason with title and home warranty that I tell you to put the rep's name in is because if you use an outside escrow and they agree to let you use your title company for whatever reason, or they agree to let you use your home warranty, outside escrows, they work with those companies, but they have different reps. So if I just in home warranty write First American Home Warranty and I wanted Rebecca to get the credit for it, they're just going to use their First American rep and Rebecca's going to get no credit because it's an outside escrow. So that's why on title and home warranty, we say put the name. As far as the escrow company, you don't have to put the escrow officer's name in there, just the escrow company if that's what you want to counter back to tell them. But if it's seller's choice, you don't have to do anything. So we write the offer, seller's choice. Owner's title insurance policy. The owner's title insurance policy is 99% of the time, 99.99% of the time, no seller is going to be hesitant to pay it. So the norm is seller. But again, if your buyer has the money to spend, just can't qualify for a higher price or whatever they're trying to do to make, even if they can qualify for a higher price, they're trying to make their offer stand out because it's competitive. You could check buyer to pay for it. In the case where I'm checking off saying where I'm going to volunteer, my buyer is going to pay for the title insurance, then I'm going to ask for my title company here. Whatever title company you use, you're going to do it. Or if you're going to split some of the title costs with the seller, again, to make your offer, and we're going to split it 50-50. Both of us are going to pay for it. If that's the case, if I'm going to pay for some of it, I might ask for my title company. Whoever's been helping you, whichever title company you work with, and your rep, make sure your rep's name goes in there. But for the most part, we're going to write our offer that the seller's going to do this because the seller, this title insurance company protects the seller from lawsuits. Because if the seller doesn't have if they don't do the title insurance and have clear title and something slips through and it gets recorded and the seller had some kind of a lien, that turns into a lawsuit from the buyer, the title insurance protects them from that. The title insurance protects the buyer from having to deal with a lien that isn't theirs. But in this case, we're asking the seller to pay for it. We're going to do the seller's choice again to make sure that we remove some of the obstacles in helping us get our offer accepted. Okay. The buyer lender's title insurance policy is defaulted to the buyer because the buyer now has to get a title insurance policy that insures the lender against the buyer's liens and encumbrances that may show up on their inspection. Now, with these two things right here, one of the things that you want to make sure gets done as early as possible is that the statement of information gets filled out. So when we talked about a week or so ago about the escrow instructions have to be back 5 days after they're received, right? That's part of what the contract says. Try to get it done as fast as possible. Get that SI done and back so title can run things against the general index and make sure that there are no personal items for the seller or the buyer that are going to cause issues down the road. The sooner we do that, the earlier we can find issues that need to be corrected as far as title goes, the better. Okay. So buyer's going to pay for their own policy. Seller's going to pay for their policy. Not abnormal to put seller's choice. Okay. County transfer tax. Again, if you want to somehow use this as a tool to improve the strength of your offer, the buyer could pay the county transfer tax fees if they had the money to do it. If not, it's not uncommon for the seller to pay for that. So you can ask for it. It's not going to weaken your offer by asking for that to happen because everybody knows that that's something that they're going to have to pay. And generally, as the listing agent, you've already included it in the net sheet for your sellers. So your seller's already, okay, yeah, I know that that's part of the fees I have to pay. Again, you want to improve your offer, you could say buyer or you could say both and take on some of the liability. Okay. But seller is normal. County transfer tax, LA and Orange is $1.10 per thousand, right? And I always forget this number, and I don't know why I forget. I say it so many times. The city transfer taxes are different, but the county transfer tax is $1.10 per thousand. So if this were a $500,000 sale, then the county transfer tax would be $550, right? $1.10 per thousand. So that would be the county transfer tax. Everybody in the county pays it. It's just part of the fees. Again, so normal that the seller probably is not going to be like, I don't want to pay for that. It was in their net sheet. If it was a good listing agent, that listing agent has explained to them how all of this stuff works anyway. And if you're a good listing agent, you've had the conversation with them. City transfer tax, really around us where we're going to do business, city of LA only. I'm selling a house in LA. I have the county transfer tax is $1.10. I have the city transfer taxes $4.50. So if that's the case, then I have a total of $5.60. That's going to be per thousand. So if I'm selling a $500,000 house and I have $5.60 that I have to times it by, that's going to be a $2,800 bill for my seller on top of it. So if you think about it, if a buyer could step in and say, I want to improve my offer by saying, I'm going to pay this because I have the money to pay it, or I'm going to take on some of it, it could be a benefit to the seller because that's not a little bit, right? So just remember that when you're doing your net sheets, and I know most of us go to our escrow company and do the net sheets, or we have the title apps, that do really great net sheets for us. And that should be calculated in those fees. But if you have to sit down with somebody and do a net sheet, or you're going to put together your own net sheet, it's good to know that, hey, I need to make sure I'm including that amount in there. Okay. So again, most people know seller, not going to be an issue, shouldn't cause anybody to be like, I don't want to pay that. Okay. They generally know. Questions before I move forward? Okay. All right. HOA fee for prepping disclosures, seller's cost, the HOA cert fee, buyer's cost, those are defaulted in, not changing. Now, you could in a counter offer, I suppose, but you can't change it when you write the offer. Okay. The transfer fees, again, normally the seller. Okay. That's not uncommon. So you don't necessarily have to worry about that as being something that's going to change how strong or weak your offer may or may not be. Okay, so seller is okay to ask for that. Private transfer fees defaulted to seller, but if you were a buyer, I suppose you could take that on. Now, private transfer fees, we're not going to see a ton of. Those are generally in the resale of new construction homes that were built by, one of the large builders. They generally put in the transfer fee so that when the owner who bought it from them originally resells the property, they get a little tax on that. And those aren't formulated. Those, I think, are just done by contract. Okay. So that's normally the seller. I wouldn't worry about taking that on as the buyer. Like I said, it says seller or if checked, buyer or both. You don't have to put if applicable. It just by default, if it is applicable, the seller is responsible for it. Okay. We talked about the fees and costs here, right? That's where I said if you were going to ask for the repairs to be done, it could go there. If your buyer is going to pay for the transaction coordinator costs, you would need to put that here, right? So that it's in the offer. Otherwise, most of the time, if you don't put this in, escrows, most of the time, escrows will not honor that and charge the fee as part of their closing costs. So you have to keep that in mind. So make sure you're putting that in your offers. And now we're starting to see, because we're doing it as a commission, not as a fee, we're starting to see, first of all, if you're having your buyer pay it, it can't just be here. It has to be in the BRBC also, because that's what's showing what they're going to pay you. So you have to put that in. And what we're seeing, and I just saw it recently, and I don't know if we're going to start seeing it more, but an escrow now sent us an actual commission instruction for that, for us to sign to approve it. So we're probably going to start seeing that again. The cash for keys do not... They don't really go here. There's a separate cash for keys agreement. There's, again, if you're negotiating that the seller's going to pay cash for keys. Now, when you say cash for keys, are you saying the seller's going to credit me a certain amount of money or pay me money to use to evict the tenant? That's different. Now, you got to be careful with that, because if it's money that this is just being given to the buyer to do that, then there could be an issue with the lender. If the seller is just going to evict the tenant, then we're going to leave it at that and let them deal with the cash for keys. As far as money going to the buyer, you got to be careful. So what you could do is if the buyer doesn't need the closing cost credit, but they're going to give the money to them to evict the tenants to use for cash for keys, then what you could do is just do it as a closing cost credit. And then the money that you would have used to pay your closing costs, because you weren't asking for the seller to pay it, you use as the cash for keys after the fact when you're the owner to evict the tenant. But you got to be careful about how you reference things in the purchase agreement, because that affects lending and you don't want that to happen. Okay. So any fees or other costs that you're going to work on are going to go here, and who's going to pay for those. Okay. Now, home warranty. One of the things that I see with home warranty, and I still see it, and it's odd, is that we get really lazy, right? And so we ask for the seller to pay for it. We throw this like a really big number in here. We pick our home warranty person, and remember, it's got to be the name of your rep, right? If you're asking for it. And then we don't have anything over here for coverages, because I know that $800 is not the basic, right? If that's the case, if I came up with that number, I came up with that number for a reason. There was some coverages that I wanted. You have to put over here, home warranty plan chosen by buyer, coverages include, but not limited to. You have to put it over here. And Anita, that's where that would go. If it was the Crest plan, and I don't know exactly the name of the plan, but that's where it would go, is whatever that coverage is, you're going to put it here. And you're going to make sure that the coverage is the right amount to get what that is, whatever it is you're asking for, right? The 13-month or whatever. I don't know all the names of them. I can't remember. But if that's what you're asking for, make sure the coverage is enough. and make sure that you're putting all of the coverages that you want, right? Sometimes, I mean, we've seen stuff where people are asking for air conditioning and pool and all kinds of, because they just go crazy, and the houses don't even have air conditioning or a pool, right? They literally will write that stuff in here and it doesn't have it. So be mindful. Now, if I am a listing agent and I get one of these offers that are like this, where it's, $1,200 with no coverages, and it's, seller's choice, right? This is how I receive the offer, like this. No coverages written in, a huge amount over here, and my choice. I've got a counter now. So I'm going to counter, hey, seller will, because you've just basically asked me for a basic home warranty plan at $1,200. I'm going to counter you back and say, okay, well, the home warranty company that I use, a basic home warranty. So I'm going to put the home warranty is going to be issued by, and whoever the company that I choose to use as listing agent, and seller will pay a maximum of, $500, whatever it is, for a basic home warranty, because that's what you've requested. $1,200 is far too much for a basic. Now, if you put the coverages in and I didn't want to pay all of it, I could say, seller agrees to pay him, if I only wanted to pay $800 of that $1,200, I would say seller agrees to pay $800 of the home warranty, buyer to be responsible for the difference, if any, for all the coverages requested. So I don't want to take their coverages away from them, but I don't want to pay for everything. If that's the case, if they need that much, I only want to pay $800, they could pay the additional $400, and that's fine. I can do that. Okay. But please make sure, and it's not hard. You can either call your rep, or the reps, especially for here in our office, the home warranty reps, they got their booklets all over the place. They're here, they're up at the front by the door. You could look at their pay schedules, and you could look at what the coverages are, and you could look at what the coverages costs, and do the right amount. Again, when we're talking about strength of offer, if I wrote an offer like this, $1,200 seller's choice, I've weakened myself, because now when they get the offer, they have to assume that we're paying $1,200 when they look at it. And now they have to counter me to lower the cost and do everything. So the more I do things right and clean and efficiently, the better my offer looks. So if I knew that the Crest coverage that I wanted, and it was, I don't know, whatever it's called, Crest 13 month, whatever the thing is, that's what I want. And I know that it costs, $950. So that's what I'm going to ask for. And I have my name in there and everything makes sense. I have a better chance of them accepting it because I wrote down what the coverages were. I did everything that was in there. Now, does that mean it's going to get accepted 100%? No, they're going to counter me too and lower the amount or not pay it or want to use their company regardless. But we want to write the offer the right way, right? So know the costs. Don't just throw a number out there that you think is enough. The thing is that even if we didn't ask for the coverage and we put the money in, you're not supposed to buy anything other than the basic. You're not supposed to just say, oh, the seller agreed to $1,200. Let me just start throwing in coverages in when you order it. It doesn't work like that. If that's the case, if that's happening, that's not the right thing. So again, if I were listing agent, I would be clear. If there was no coverages asked for, my counter would be, I will pay a maximum of, fine, I'll pay a maximum of $1,200, but only for a basic home warranty, no additional coverages. Because now guess what? It's not going to be $1,200 and I'm going to get that credit back. I'm going to get that money back. I'm only going to pay the amount for the basic home warranty. So if the buyer's agent isn't smart enough to put the coverages in, I'm not going to give them extra coverage. I'm going to lower the amount that I'm going to pay and they're going to get a basic from me. That's just, again, that's what you guys should assume is going to happen to you when you write your offers. Okay. Any questions? Other terms, anything could go in here. Now, one of the things that we have to make sure that we're doing as buyer's agents is we've got to disclose if we're related to the buyers, if we ourselves are the buyers, right? If our buyer is another agent, not us, not representing themselves, but the principal, the buyer is an agent, we've got to disclose that here, that the buyer is a licensed real estate agent in the state of California. If I'm buying something under my corporation and representing myself, I've got to disclose. Officer of the corporation is a licensed agent and they are representing this corporation as the buyer's agent in this transaction, I have to disclose it. If we're related to the buyer's agent is related to the buyer. That's it. I just have to let them know. It's better to do it right now. And if I'm the listing agent and I'm related to the seller, or I am the seller, or my corporation's the seller, same thing. That disclosure needs to be made in my counter offers, not later on. Has to be done right away. One of the costliest lawsuits that we were ever involved in as a company was one of the reasons why we were involved is because the agent did not disclose in their offer that their corporation, who was the purchaser, was their corporation, right? So they were representing themselves, buying a property that they had listed using their corporation and didn't disclose it to the sellers. And that was one of the pieces of, very costly lawsuit. So please make sure you're making that disclosure. And this is the place you could do it right here. If, for example, other things that could go in here, if this is subject to interior inspection. And this is one of the things that I think people are confused by. One of the most confusing things for agents. When I write an offer that is subject to interior inspection, what that means is there was no access to the property, and the only way for the seller to sell the property was to sell it with nobody seeing it until there was an offer accepted. So if I submit an offer to a seller, to a listing agent that is subject to interior inspection, the proper steps are the listing agent presents it to the seller. The seller either accepts it, rejects it, or counters it. Once they do that, and I then either accept their counter or they have accepted my offer, we then schedule an inspection time for the buyer to go in. The buyer then goes in and says, yes, okay, I want to move forward. We're not talking about the professional home inspection. You could pay for that and schedule it at that point if you wanted to, but that's just a interior inspection. I walk into the unit or units that were unavailable when I wrote the offer. I look around, I say, yes, this is acceptable. Let's continue to move forward. Or I walk in and go, oh no, this is far worse than I thought it was. I'm going to send you cancellation instructions subject to my interior inspection. And then I cancel. If I get an offer like this as a listing agent, then what I want to do is I want to accept, I'm going to counter it. We're going to go through the whole acceptance process, but my counter is going to be a specific amount of time for them to do that inspection. I'm going to say, hey, the buyer to do their interior inspection within, 2 days, 3 days of acceptance. And then they're going to give their written approval or send cancellation instructions of the property. But subject to interior inspection is just that. I want my offer to either get accepted or rejected subject to me going to see the property. It's not, I send this offer subject to interior inspection. Then because I got an offer, listing agent says, okay, go see it now. And then if you like it, then we'll accept your offer. That's not what subject to interior inspection means. And right now, besides there being tenants, people are using subject to interior inspection for properties that are in coming soon status. So if you have a property, a listing that is in coming soon status, you get to do, and that's on the MLS, right? On the MLS and the coming soon, you can do everything with that listing except show it. Okay. So just receiving an offer that says subject to interior inspection does not remove the requirement on coming soons of not showing it. But if I accept the offer subject to interior inspection and then allow them into the property, I am still within my rights to move forward with that transaction. There is no violation. If somehow somebody could prove that I showed that property to that agent prior to accepting the offer and then not making the property active the next day after I showed it, I could be subject to that violation. Okay. I know that that's a stretch that anybody could ever find that out, but you never know. Okay. So maybe you have, and I've seen this, you have multiple agents that are sending these listings, these offers in as subject to interior inspection. And then you're saying, okay, everybody can come see it on this day, and you haven't accepted an offer yet. Now you get 4 or 5 agents and buyers that come in, they take a look at the property. You only accept one of those offers, and the other ones are upset and they want to turn you in for showing a property that was under coming soon. They could do that. And, there are agents out there that would be willing to be vindictive like that because you didn't accept their offer. So you've got to be careful. So just understand that subject to interior inspection means that inspection is going to be done after the acceptance of the offer, whether it be through counters or just straight ahead the offer. All right. So we're at 11:56. I'm going to stop sharing there, give you guys a second to ask some questions here. Anybody have any questions about anything that either we talked about, something we have talked about in the past, or just something that's going on with you that you need some help with? Clarify. Anybody? All right. Terrific. Well, if you need me, you know where to find me. So we're going to continue on. And next week when we do this, it's going to be a lot of addendums and amendments that we may have looked at some of them earlier, but we're going to look at them again because this is where it's kind of like, this is the paragraph that shows everything that is part of the transaction. So we're going to go through a lot. So it's probably going to take us a couple weeks to go through that. All right. Yes, Danny, go Dodgers. Please go Dodgers. Thank you guys for being here. I really, 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 really appreciate you spending this hour with me every week so that you can become the experts that I know you all want to be. So I appreciate it. Thank you again so much. You guys go out there, be productive, and I will see you again soon. Take care.